welcome to everyone who's joined. Thank you very much for joining us, and we appreciate it's the end of the day, so we want to try and get as much information as we can crammed in, so we don't take up too much more of your time. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar. This is a webinar that's going to be talking about the PhD Studentship Scheme that PRUK have recently launched. We launched our first round last year. We're very grateful to the panel members for attending, and also our 2024 PhD award holder, who's also joining us to speak about her experiences of the award. I'd like to start with some brief welcomes. So if I can first ask Adam just to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Desh, and it's great to be part of the webinar. My name's Adam Todd. I'm a professor of pharmaceutical public health based at Newcastle University, and I'm chair of the scientific advisory panel.
Thank you, Adam. And next, Li Chia.
Hello, everyone. My name is Li Jiaqian. I am a professor of drug utilization research at University of Manchester, based in the Division of Pharmacy and Optometry, and one of the committee members for the PRUK Scientific Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Li Chia. And Becky.
Hi everyone, my name is Becky. I'm a disabled autistic adult and a carer for a child with special educational needs. I've been volunteering in patient involvement now for about 13 years, and I'm one of the lay members or patient representatives on the scientific panel.
Thank you, Becky. And Sarah.
Hello everyone, my name's Sarah Jones and I'm one of the two successful candidates from last year's doctoral programme, and I look forward to telling you a bit more about my experience with the application.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That's great. So what I'm going to do is just go over the points and what we aim to cover in this webinar. So hopefully you will be able to see my screen. Can you all see an agenda in front of you?
Yes, thanks, Des.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna go over a brief overview of PRUK and why we essentially kind of developed this PhD studentship scheme, and a bit about how we assess applications that come into this scheme. Once I've given that presentation, I'll hand over to Sarah, who's going to briefly speak about her project and also her experience of applying, which is going to hopefully very nicely lead us to talking about the strengths and weaknesses of the applications we typically receive, including some of the common feedback that we offer to applicants and what are the things you need to consider. And we're going to end with a focus on PPI, which is a crucial area for these projects, and something that applicants often do get wrong. So we want to talk about that in greater detail. And finally, we can finish with a Q&A. Now, I do want to say, and I'll just stop sharing that. I do want to add that if you do have any questions, you're welcome to put it in the chat. There will be a Q&A at the end, but please do put any questions you have in the chat. And what I'll do is I'll periodically review the chat and try to get to your questions while we're going through the webinar. So I'm just going to share now my presentation for you all. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. So welcome to this webinar, a bit about Pharmacy Research UK. So we are a charity that's dedicated to supporting pharmacy professionals to undertaking pharmacy research. We're normally focused on early career researchers or pharmacists and pharmacy professionals who are at the beginning of their research journey. So the funds that we typically offer is pre-doctoral and doctoral level. So our doctoral level funding is the PhD scheme that we're here to talk about. Since we were formed in 2013, we've spent over £2 million in pharmacy research, and we are a member of the Association for Medical Research Charities, which means that the way we assess our applications are regularly reviewed through an audit. We have an audit coming in this year, and it means that applications are assessed to the highest possible standard. In terms of our research strategy, so you can see we have 6 main themes, and we've purposefully left the themes broad. The reason being is because we want to encourage as many applications from pharmacy professionals in research to come in. We really try not to exclude any research area. I mean, the only thing we do not fund is basic lab research because that's outside of our remit. Other than that, we consider and will fund almost any area of research relating to pharmacy. Our funding calls are typically response mode, which essentially means that we have a round that's open and we see what applications come in, and we will assess those applications and fund the best ones or the ones that are worth funding. And we go through a fairly rigorous process, which I'll go through with you in a minute. In terms of how we're governed, we have a board of trustees. They meet quarterly, so they're responsible for kind of giving us operational oversight, and they also ratify the funding recommendations from our scientific advisory panel. And you've met some of our panel members here in this webinar. Our panel meet twice a year, normally in June and December, and it's the June meeting where they review all of the applications that have come in and have made it through the shortlisting process. So our panel, we rely on for guidance in terms of our research strategy, guidance in terms of how we can promote ourselves as a charity, what areas of research we need to be prioritizing or thinking of, so that they are absolutely essential to the way we're governed as an organization. As I mentioned, we offer a range of funding schemes, mainly pre-doctoral. So we have a research training bursary scheme. So if you're a pharmacy professional who's interested in maybe doing a master's degree or perhaps doing a course in developing your research skills and knowledge, then we offer funding for that. We also offer our PhD Studentship Scheme. I'll just allow Sarah in. Our PhD Studentship Scheme. So this is our flagship award. So this is funding to undertake a full-time or part-time PhD. We're very proud of being able to, offer this to pharmacy professionals because we appreciate there is a fair bit of demand in this. We did have a project grants round, which we last funded in 2016, which we've since closed, and we've putting those resources into partnering with other organizations. So we're partnering with the British Oncology Pharmacy Association, the College of Mental Health Pharmacy, Wellbeing of Women, Diabetes UK, and NIHR on their pre-doctoral scheme. So we really do try as a small charity to ensure that our resources can stretch as far as possible. Now, here is a kind of a basic overview of the way that applications are processed. So once a call deadline finishes, and I'll go over the dates of when when the PhD scheme will finish a bit later, applications come in and they are initially assessed by myself to make sure that the application is complete and that the remit is eligible, usually is. They will be then processed through a period of shortlisting and external peer review if the application passes the initial shortlisting phase, and I'll describe in a minute what that means. Once we have external peer reviewer comments, that application with the initial shortlisting scores and the peer reviewer comments is then sent to the panel meeting in June, where the whole panel convene to talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of this application and whether it needs to be considered for funding. If the application is considered fundable, we will then invite the candidate for an interview. And so the interview is an opportunity for us to meet the candidate, to kind of hash out any areas of concern the panel have. And then it is after that interview process where the panel make their final decision as to whether the candidate will receive and be granted the award. All of those decisions are ratified and overseen by our board of trustees, and then that's when we offer the feedback to the applicants, and then we kind of undertake contracting. So in terms of the review process, so an application submitted, so I'll review it for completeness. And then I'll assign the application to 2 scientific members of our scientific advisory panel and 1 PPI member. So they're assigned per application, and then we ask them to complete a form assessing each of the aspects of the application and provide a score. It is that score that determines whether the application will be passed through shortlisting or not. So we have kind of like a traffic light system. We have an average score which indicates it's quite low and not fundable, a score which indicates it's high and should be considered and discussed further, or there is this middle zone where it's a good application, but there are some concerns and there's questions whether it's fundable. At that point, we will kind of liaise with those members to find out whether we should invite it for further discussion so it benefits from the full panel's view. Once that shortlisting process is completed, we will then send it out for external peer review. So those applications that are shortlisted will benefit from external independent review, and we follow the AMRC standards on that. It is those reviews that are then collated and then reviewed and discussed at the scientific advisory panel meeting, where everyone then decides which application should be shortlisted further for interview. Then we interview the candidates in July, and then in July is when we make the final recommendations. So that is my presentation. I just want to check in now. Does anyone have any questions at this point? I see no questions so far. Yes.
Thanks.
Hello.
Thanks, Desh. Yes, and just to add, I'm currently actually a fellow with the School of Primary Care Research with the NIHR. So this is really interesting, kind of doing a career progression fellowship, so pre-doctoral stage. Just in terms of a timeline, is there a timeline for, so you mentioned June, is there a timeline for all the various stages that we can have access to for this year?
Absolutely. Yes. So the information should be on our website. We provide a basic timeline on our website when the deadline for the call is, and when we notify applicants of when the interviews take place and when the final decisions are made. So it's like a basic timeline. In terms of the specific dates, we don't have that published on our website, but I'll be very happy after this to email you with the actual dates, if that's helpful, to email everyone with that information, if that's helpful. The key information for you is the deadline of when you need to submit by, and I guess when the interviews take place if you're shortlisted. So that's the key information, but I'm happy to provide a more robust kind of timeline of all the events if that's helpful for you. I'd be happy to do that. No problem. All right, so if I may invite Sarah to give her presentation. So I'm just going to share my screen once more. All right, Sarah, just let me know when you'd like me to move to the next screen.
Thanks, Dash. We're seeing the sort of working end of PowerPoint. I don't know if did you want to pop it on, or is it on presentation mode and the screens are the other? There you go. Perfect. Thank you. So thank you very much for inviting me to come and join this webinar. My name's Sarah Jones, and it's really exciting and still feels quite novel to be able to say I'm a PhD student part-time at Bristol Medical School. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my project, but I suspect what's perhaps more useful and of interest is also about my reflections on applying, and then we're going to move into a more general discussion about tips for applications. But this is my project title. So I'm researching the efficacy of usual care to support safe antidepressant withdrawal in English GP practices. If you could do the next slide, Dash.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought one useful thing to talk about would be where the research idea came from and its development. And I just wanted to give you an indication really of how many different threads came together to come up with this project idea for me. So in common with lots of people, this wasn't the first time I'd applied for research funding. And one of the things that I was able to do was work in feedback I've had from other applications that weren't successful to help develop this project. But it's worth saying that the idea for this as a topic came from, well, lots of places, and I've sort of outlined 4 main ones on the slide. So in particular, my clinical role, so I'd worked in mental health. You can see my NHS badge there for Avon and Wiltshire Mental Health Trust for many years, and this topic as one of importance had come from patients that I'd worked with and carers, as well as a theme that kept coming up in my practice, where it seemed that we could manage this issue better. And then as my role changed in my NHS employment, I got more involved in service delivery and management, and I could see some of the challenges in this area from that perspective as well, not just as an individual clinician. I moved roles and emphasis in 2020, interesting year to start a new job, where I took up a teaching role at the University of Bath, and still very much using lots of my background as a mental health specialist. And so I was doing quite a lot of teaching on the postgraduate schemes, so with practicing pharmacists and hearing about their experiences working with patients with mental health difficulties. And again, this topic of medication discontinuation came up a lot through that. Inevitably, of course, as you'd expect, the published literature was really important in forming the research idea. And again, it was something that I had followed published work on this for quite a long time prior to putting together this particular application. And I was keen to make sure I was looking at a wide range of perspectives from different types of researchers, so not just pharmacy and medical, but psychological, and also there was a lot starting to see more patient published research, which again was a big influence on my application. And then finally, I was really fortunate to be able to have support from lots of existing professional networks, and I've just put a few of them there. So College of Mental Health Pharmacy was really important to me. The IIPDW, which is a service user or patient co-led group that supports better research into psychiatric drug withdrawal. And then for me, down in the Southwest Pharmacy Research Network was another way to get support. The next slide, please, Dash. Oh, it's not moved on for me, but I don't know if it has. There we go.
Oh,
thank you.
yeah.
That's always the excitement of presenting in teams. I wanted to pop up this slide on the supervisory team, partly because they're fantastic people and gave me a lot of support in writing the application, and also to say how key it is to find the right people to support you. One of the bits of feedback I'd had previously on a project submission was that I hadn't drawn clear enough links between the skills of the supervisory team and what I was planning to do in the project. So that was something I was really aware of this time. And say this team of 3 people who had a combination of methodological experience and clinical expertise relevant to the topic was really important. Next slide, please. Just to say a little bit about building the application then, I was really keen from the start to make sure that my thought process about why this was important research was clear. And the 2 kind of key threads that I wanted to bring out in the application were one, that it was an issue that affects lots of people, because lots of people take antidepressants. And it's worth saying that as well as published literature, I was able to use things like the data published by the NHS Business Services Authority, who have some great data out there on prescribing, which was really useful to be able to put up-to-date figures in the application. So that was an important part of it. And then I wanted to build on that to say this is an important issue for lots of people, and there's a clear gap in the existing research. Partly I built that through my literature review and pulling together published work, but to kind of back that up, I was also lucky that other organisations had identified the gap as well. So I was able to cite people like NICE and the Cochrane Library who'd already said, yes, there's a research gap, and that was sort of a big part of building my application. Next slide, please. I won't spend too long on the details of the project because I'm sure you're more interested in my reflections on the application, but just to outline, this was the overall aim. So looking to assess both patient and practitioner experiences of antidepressant deprescribing and thinking about usual care and how it could be improved. Next slide, please. And then just for completeness, I've given you my list of objectives as they were in the application. So a key thing for us was that this was a prospective study following patients from the point of deciding to reduce their medication. And that, again, was part of identifying the research gap in that there'd been quite a lot of research, looking back at people's experiences, but limited amounts of prospective longitudinal work. And then we've just outlined in a bit more detail what we were looking to gather information on. So a key outcome was around what proportion of patients could successfully stop, and then wanting to understand the data that described usual care in a bit more detail. The final objective was another important one in terms of this being a PRUK study, in that we'd identified there was a key role for pharmacists, non-medical prescribers, which hadn't been well researched in this area either, and that was another thread wanted to draw out. Next slide, please. This is a summary of the work, which is probably for another webinar in the future, but I tried to explain the project outline by splitting it into 3 different work streams. So one that was quantitative and the sort of longitudinal work that I've already described. And then to illuminate that a bit more, we were going to have these 2 qualitative work streams. So we're going to look at patient experience through interviews, but also practitioner, so prescriber experience, also through a set of interviews. Next slide, please. Oh, again, mine's got stuck. Oh, there we go. Thank you very much. So last couple of slides from me, because I'm conscious of the time, but I wanted to give you a few reflections on the application. So a big one for me is you won't be able to do it alone. I, in my various different work roles, have got very used to needing to be very self-sufficient in lots of my work, and this is not something you can do without support from other people. So you have to be really prepared to ask for lots of help and be comfortable with getting constructive feedback. So kind of being able to share drafts that you know aren't perfect, but you need to be doing that throughout the process. There's a hard process of juggling deadlines because, as Desha said, you'll have the final deadline for the application, but then there's sort of lots of micro deadlines throughout that. So you need to plan for those sorts of things. If you're asking, say, proposed supervisors to review drafts of your work, you need to plan back, well, what are their time commitments and when can they do that for you? And similarly, in terms of other people that you need to liaise with. So I've given a few suggestions there. So people like the Research Support Service and Research Delivery Network. So they're NIHR partners who can help with the preparation of your application. Lots and lots of people with loads of useful input, but again, you need to plan the time to be able to get their support. This is very basic stuff, but do read the form. There's a lot of information there, and I kept going back and rereading to make sure that I'd covered everything. And obviously, as we said, work back from the deadline date and think about the protected time that you can somehow manufacture in your life to work on the application. In particular, I realized that it was not just people like my proposed supervisors who needed to put signatures on the form, but quite senior people in my proposed department at Bristol, people who I didn't have an existing working relationship with. So you need to leave enough time that, you know, someone senior in finance and a head of a big academic department has got sufficient time to at least have a look at the application and be happy to put their signature to it. There are things that can save you time, like referencing software. So it's definitely, I would say, worth investing in those at the start to help save you time later on. And if you are reusing things from other applications, which I was, just make sure that they are sufficiently updated and are relevant to what PRUK are looking for. Next slide, please. This is my last one. You'll be glad to know.
It's moved for me.
Oh, there must be a little delay. Must be a little delay on how it goes. There we go. Lovely. Thank you. So hopefully this will kind of move into what others on the panel are going to talk about. But thinking about the project and you, and again, some of the things I found challenging, making sure you keep the patient at the centre of your project, and what is your ultimate why? Why are you proposing this bit of work? Really setting the context. So make sure you know what else is going on in the research field that you're interested in. That was particularly relevant for me when a Q paper was published about 2 or 3 weeks before my interview, and I had to be prepared to say, this is why my work is complementary to this and not a replication of it. Make sure it's all clear. You get so invested in the application that you can sort of start to lose perspective a little bit. So if you've got people who can proofread for you, it's really helpful. And I think others on the panel are going to talk about this, but do be realistic about what can be achieved with the time and money. Research is a complicated business, and there are things that you'll need to put aside funding for that you might not have thought about. So do think about that. And then finally, I guess the top bullet point really on you as an individual, and perhaps something doesn't always naturally come to us as pharmacists or pharmacy technicians or pharmacy professionals. You do have to be prepared to blow your own trumpet, because this is not just an investment in the project, but it's an investment in you as an individual. So again, having someone external to look at your application might help you see places where they'd say more about this thing that you've done, because it really shows your skills that are relevant. And then the last bit, I think, is just a kind of bit of a psychological reflection, if you like. It is a hard balance between investing in the application and envisaging how this award would help you, and how you can be confident that you could carry out this project, against knowing that your success is not guaranteed, because that's the nature of research funding. I don't have a good answer to that, other than to say I think it's sort of part of the process of applying for these awards, whoever the awarding body are, and you kind of have to just live with that uncertainty, and the only way to have a chance of being successful is to put an application in. So I've overrun my time, so I'll stop there. Thank you, Tesh.
Thank you very much, Sarah. No, that's really useful. You've touched upon a couple of points, which, you know, it does overlap with what we're about to discuss. But I just want to highlight a couple. Firstly, you know, from my perspective as research manager, taking the time to read the application form and the guidance sounds so simple, but really it's crucial, because in the guidance, we outline what the panel are expecting in terms of what question is really asking, what information we're really after. So really understanding the guidance is crucial, and anyone who's in the process of completing it and are not sure, just to get in touch with the team, and we can always forward any queries that might be scientifically, you know, require some scientific input to our panel, who are also happy to help. And interesting, you mentioned around discussing your own development. That's a key, because a part of this application is not just about the projects, it's about, you know, we're not stealing Adam's words here, but we're not just funding the projects, we're funding the person. That's the point of us, to really invest in the person, their skills, and see how they can go on the trajectory towards becoming a researcher and taking that research forward. So yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. So what I will do is just quickly share my screen again. And I'll just make that bigger. Okay, so if it's okay with the panel, I'm just going to do a quick overview, and then I'll invite you to contribute. So the feedback that you can see on this screen is based upon feedback that we issued in the last round, specific to the PhD scheme. However, and I think hopefully the panel will agree with me, these feedback points that we give are not unique to the PhD scheme. These are common feedback points that we tend to give time and again to applicants. So we try to kind of reduce this to, where do applicants typically go wrong, and what are the things you need to think about? So one of the feedback points we gave was, it was unclear how this proposal would add to the data that already exists. It's just saying that you have to make sure, and this is what Sarah said, you are aware of the existing literature. Where does your project fit in? Where does your research question fit in? How is it, you know, adding to any value to what's already existing, or plugging a gap? And making that as simple and concise and clear as possible is absolutely vital, because it's kind of like telling a story. You're setting the scene for why your research is important. So that's a significant factor. The aims and objectives were deemed to be too ambitious. You can see on our website, there was a post that Professor David Wright from the University of Leicester wrote for us a long time ago around why grants tend to promise to deliver and yet fail. And the panel have become so susceptible to looking and seeing signs of when a proposal aims to deliver too much. at the end of the day, they look at the aims and objectives versus how much of the applicant's time, the researcher's time, is dedicated on that project and what other commitments they have going on. So make sure that you're honest with yourself and that whatever you're proposing to do is realistic, because it can be quite tempting to be ambitious because we feel, maybe my chances will be higher. However, often it can work against you. It was unclear how PPI was costed in the application. Some applications have had really good PPI included. However, because there's not been sufficient costings or it's not clear, that's not given confidence to the panel that the researchers and the team have really thought through where those different PPI related activities fit in. So make sure that it's costed and it's appropriate. Again, we've had a point where benefits to patients and the public were not clearly explained, and so it was difficult to discern the relevance of the outcome to patients. This goes back to the point, and I'm sure we'll touch upon this a bit later, that you have to involve your patients and public representatives from the outset, from the research question all the way through to dissemination strategy, because that's going to help you to make sure that your research question and proposal is always at the core focused on what matters to the patients that your research is looking at. Proposed methods lack sufficient detail. This is fairly common, that applications lack the detail needed. Now, there is a word limit to each section, so there's a bit of a skill in terms of what information is absolutely necessary and what doesn't add any information or clarity to the application form. So it's knowing, how do I piece together this story and what is it the panel need to know? So again, reading the guidance can help you do that. And lastly, the plain English summary would have benefited from further simplification. It sounds trivial, but really, a good plain English summary is often an indicator of how involved patient and public representatives have been in the application. So it's certainly not a tokenistic thing, and that's why we have a separate discussion now on PPI. Can I offer and invite the panel members to add to any of those points, perhaps if I've missed anything or anything you'd like to add?
So Desh, if I could just add, so thank you for that, and also to Sarah for a brilliant presentation on her hopefully really positive experience in going through the process. But I think just to really hit home, I think is our discussions on the panel. We have never not funded an application on the basis of there is not enough research in the proposal. We often have discussions that actually this proposal is too ambitious. It contains too much work, and that's an often reason. That's probably the most common reason actually why we decide not to fund an application. So please speak to potential supervisors. Think about the research. Think about a realistic timescale for your work. If your work is around accessing data, for example, so if that's a key package or theme of your proposed PhD, think about that data. Think about how you're going to access that data. That sort of thing. So talk to people with experience who have access to a certain data set, for example, and that would give the panel confidence that actually there's a lot of experience and also expertise put around the potential student to fund the PhD. So I think that's really important around how realistic is this work. I think the other thing is, I appreciate colleagues on the call will have a lot of experience in their professional work. Many on the call will be kind of clinical experts in their own spaces. Please make sure that the proposal is understandable, that there's a clear research question there, so we can again judge if the methods that you've said you're going to employ will be able to answer the research question. So that's another important thing. And I think the final thing is really, if you're unsure, please just reach out and ask. I think, hopefully we're all very friendly, very happy to support people, because ultimately we want to be funding the best possible PhD students. So if you're not sure, please do get in touch and ask. Thanks, Desh. That's all the points.
Thank you. No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. I'll just stop sharing just so I can see if there's anyone else from the panel want to add to that, or if there's any questions at this point before we move on. No, okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Adam, and hopefully that covers some of the tips. So I'll move on now to PPI. So I'm just going to share my screen once more. Okay, great. So yeah, patient and public involvement and engagement. This is a crucial area and it's not just an add-on to the application process, it's really integral to the success of your PhD application. First of all, having clear information about PPI roles. So if there is PPI involved, then what does that look like? How many members are there? What are their backgrounds? Are there steering groups that are focused on PPI activities? How often have they been involved? From when? So it's really important to understand what does the PPI look like in the application form. So in terms of the background and expertise of the PPI members, their experience with a particular illness or with research, what role are they playing? That's absolutely crucial. Consideration of any illnesses or neurodiversity or accessibility requirements are important because we've had feedback before in previous rounds how while the researchers have kind of targeted the kind of cohort of patients that they're looking to recruit to the study, they've actually not intentionally but omitted a certain population who are neurodiverse who would have a different perspective or perhaps don't have accessibility to the internet so they can't complete the survey or it's very it comes down to very basic things but it's about ensuring that you maximize the kind of I guess, make it as generalizable as possible in terms of the patient and public members you're involving in your application, what they have access to, how technologically savvy they are, what their experiences of life. So it's really important to consider all of these things. This is the burden if they're involved in meetings or being involved in the research. If they're what burden is on them, are they having to change childcare, arrange childcare to come, and if so, is that being considered? Is there flexibility for them? Are they being remunerated appropriately? So it's about ensuring that you work closely with the patient and public representatives to make sure they're happy and they're comfortable to be involved and that any accessibility requirements are catered for. And a point to that, just scheduling appointments in advance, remunerating them, and having an early adoption of and involvement of PPI. Becky, if I can bring you in on this point, so the early adoption and involvement of PPI, would you be able to speak more about that? I know how you've mentioned before it's important for patient and public representatives to be involved from the outset. Would you mind talking a bit more about that from your experience?
Yeah, that's fine. Hi everyone, I'm one of the PPI members on the scientific committee. Patient involvement at a really early stage is very important. There are a number of clinical trials studies that are written, and it's the patients who find the mistakes in the documents in the trials, such as accessibility, patient burden, that the research question might have already been answered, although in some cases that the research isn't really relevant to their needs and isn't answering an important research question. If you don't involve patients and carers right at the beginning of a project, it can be really hard to recruit them because they can feel kind of left out in the process as well, and they want to be engaged in the design and the formulation of the research question. So I think that is a really important topic. It's now easier than ever to recruit people. People are using People in Research, which is an online recruitment website for public and patient involvement. They're using Voices, which is another online website with a similar format, and also increasingly Eventbrite, which is one that's has come up recently for organising focus groups and one-to-one telephone calls with patients and that kind of thing. I think importantly, it's just we like to see basic job descriptions, so adverts just telling us what's involved, time commitments, what you're looking for, and experience. So it's almost, for us, it's almost like applying for a job. Obviously, it's voluntary and a limited number of hours and that kind of thing. But the recruitment process is quite similar to asking people to apply for a normal job. I hope that's useful.
Yeah, thank you very much, Becky. That really is, and it's crucial that you mentioned about having them involved from the outset, because otherwise they may be reluctant to be involved. So it's about thinking kind of ahead as to how you can engage with members and participants, and make sure you have people on your team who can cover all aspects of the application. And it really comes down to the last 2 points. Having a clear explanation of the PPI involvement in your application, in your research project, and also having patient-centered research, which is absolutely vital. At this point, I would like to just briefly check in if there's any questions before we move on to the last section. No questions at this point. Okay, so we'll move on to the last section, which is the top tips. So we've already, so I'm just sharing my screen now. We've already kind of discussed some of these elements, but I think it's worth kind of wrapping up the webinar with this. So ensure you give yourself sufficient time to complete each element of the proposal. It sounds obvious, but again, time can really slip away from you. And what Sarah mentioned is about working backwards. So you have the deadline date is on our website. You work backwards from that date as to when you want to have your first draft ready, your final draft, your supervisor's kind of reviewing everything, making sure everything's correct. We encourage you to liaise, if you're based in England, with the Research Support Service, which can help you to kind of review your application and have extra support as well. Another top tip is to present the impact that the research will have by integrating target audiences from the outset. So this is what Becky mentioned and we just spoke about. It's not enough really to list the kind of journals or conferences you want to attend. While that's important, it's about what is the impact. And to determine the impact, you need to have the kind of patient groups and people you're working with and representing involved from the outset. So it's very clear where else you can kind of disseminate the information and how you can disseminate the research so you can maximize the opportunity to promote it. As I mentioned, the plain English summary is often an indication as to how well thought through PPI is. Your supervisory expertise is crucial. So making sure that you have supervisors who are experts in the different areas that you're working in, including methodological expertise, and having the relevant training in order for you to be able to carry out the PhD, and to make sure that there's sufficient detail in each element of the application form. Break it down. Background, literature, where does my research fit in? Now I'm proposing to use these research methods. Why? How is that going to help answer the research question and address my aims and objectives? So you're really breaking it down and providing a clear, rational, coherent case for your project. That, along with involved and engaged PPI representatives, will mean you have a good, strong chance of getting the funding. At this point, I want to stop sharing yet again and ask and invite any panel members to add to any final top tips or anything you'd like to share at this point.
Sorry, Dash. Hi. Sorry,
Hello.
I forgot to raise my hand. Yeah, I totally agree with you about the timing things. Timing is very, very important. So most of the applicant, they may feel a bit overwhelmed by how big is the scale. So a very good kind of advice from the colleagues will be quite important. And secondly is I do feel if they do have time, maybe have someone peer review their application will be helpful, because most of the time we don't really see what's problem with our own writing. And then sometimes people can give us a kind of the other view on that, particularly if PPI group, can help, that'll be great.
Thank you, Licha. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why time is such a crucial factor, because these things take time to find colleagues who can peer review and read it for you and to revise your drafts, work with your supervisors. While we have the live round open for 3 months or so, really you need to prepare in advance. So the templates that we have are available on our website all year round. So you can use them to kind of draft your application and then submit when the time is right. Just to finish off, actually, we do have some comments in the chat, so I'll get to that now. We have a question from Diana. May I ask what the PhD Studentship funds? Yes, so it funds all the core aspects of the PhD. So that includes a stipend for your time during the PhD, tuition, it includes training, and yeah, all the core costs and the research costs as well to undertake the PhD. So though it covers everything you need in order to complete the PhD. What I'll just quickly do is get the timeline for you so everyone's aware. So the deadline for the round is on the 26th of March. That's a Wednesday at 1 p.m. So that's the deadline you have to submit your proposal for this round. So in case you have any questions about the process, please do get in touch with myself. And if you want, we can always put you in touch with a panel member as well. Are there any other questions at this point before we perhaps wrap up? And thank you to Becky. Of course, anything to do with PPI, please do get in touch and we can also provide some support there. Adam, are you happy for us to wrap up? Has that covered everything? I think it has.
That's been great. Thank you very much, Desh, and thanks to everybody for your time. It's been really helpful, and we hope to get some really excellent PhD applications coming in.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Thank you very much to the panel for your time, and thank you all this evening for joining us. The webinar will be available on our website, and we'll send out a tweet once it's live on our website. So yeah, thank you all very much, and enjoy your evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.